Well, here we are, Wednesday morning, and wow, what an election night. I don't know about you, but I was up late watching the results roll in.
Yeah, it was a nail biter for sure. Definitely some surprises, and I think we've got a lot to unpack in terms of what it all means.
Exactly. So we're diving right into it, going beyond the headlines and digging deep into what this election really means for the country.
Looking at the big picture.
Yep, and we've got some great insights from a Forbes newsletter to help us do just that. They've covered everything from, the presidential race, obviously, down to the congressional battles, and even some of the potential economic and social impacts we might see.
Sounds like they've covered all the bases.
They really have, and I think our listeners are going to find this deep dive super interesting.
Looking forward to it.
All right, so let's start with the big one, right? Donald Trump wins a second term.
I mean, that's the headline, right?
It is. Flipping some key states along the way, too, like Georgia,
Georgia, yep, Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, some of the ones that many people thought would be close were.
Absolutely. And it was decisive. I mean, 277 electoral votes.
Well over the 200 needed, no question about it.
The AP culled it just after 5:30 this morning. I have to admit, I was glued to the screen
Oh, yeah?
watching those numbers. What do you think this victory says about the state of, well, Trumpism, I guess you could say?
I think it really shows that it shows the staying power. It shows the connection he has with a certain segment of voters. He faced a lot of controversies, a lot of predictions that this was it for him, but clearly that wasn't the case.
Not at all.
He's politically resilient, and that message really resonates with people who feel, I think, forgotten, let down by the political establishment.
That's a great point. And speaking of interesting figures, I noticed in his victory speech, he gave a shout out to Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Called him a new star, a super genius. It's interesting because, Musk was one of his big financial backers.
Well, that's certainly noteworthy, isn't it? Makes you think about the role of money in politics these days, especially with someone like Musk who has, so much influence. What kind of impact could that have on policy?
That's a big question. We'll have to see how it all plays out. Now, moving on to a different kind of green, let's talk about marijuana. Specifically, Florida's Amendment 3, which would have legalized recreational use.
Right.
It went up in smoke, despite even having Trump's support, which is interesting.
You'd think with Florida having the biggest medical marijuana market already and being a typically red state, this would have been a shoo-in.
Yeah.
But it didn't even hit that 60% voter approval. It shows just how complicated this issue is and how strong the opposition can be.
And this wasn't just about, people wanting to legally light up. We're talking serious money here. Projections had the state's cannabis market hitting $6 billion by 2026.
Yeah, that's a huge economic opportunity, missed opportunity, I guess you could say, not just for the industry, but for Florida. And you have to think about the players involved. Trulieve, they spent a ton on the Yes campaign. Governor DeSantis was against it. And then you've got Ken Griffin, the hedge fund billionaire, donating big to the no side.
A real clash of the titans.
It was, wasn't it? And I think it's a good example of the various forces at play when it comes to cannabis legalization.
Absolutely. There's a quote here from Emily Paxia. She's the co-founder of the cannabis hedge fund Poseidon that I think captures the mood well. She says, "The industry is used to getting knocked down. We will keep standing back up."
Resilient bunch, aren't they?
Yeah.
They had to be. I think this setback will just make them reevaluate their strategies and adapt. It'll be interesting to see how they approach legalization going forward, especially after this loss in a state that seemed, well, ready.
Now let's talk about the battle for Congress. Another big story from this election. Republicans took control of the Senate.
Yep, flip some key seats.
They did. West Virginia and Ohio went their way.
Jim Justice won in West Virginia. Bernie Moreno took Ohio.
And then there was that super tight race in Montana. Trump-backed Tim Sheehy beat out John Tester, the incumbent.
Lots of money flying around in that one from billionaires on both sides.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
These congressional races don't always get the same attention as the presidential race, but they have a huge impact on everything, really. What gets done, the political climate.
Absolutely. And with this power shift, Republicans controlling the Senate, things are going to get interesting.
Definitely going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears to Wall Street, the market reaction to the election was, it was surprisingly positive.
Yeah, a lot of people were expecting more volatility, weren't they?
I think so. All the major U.S. stock indexes actually rallied on Election Day. The S&P 500 had its best pre-election 3-month stretch since 1928. And then, when it became clear Trump was winning, U.S. stock futures surged. It seems like investors are feeling optimistic, maybe even a little relieved.
I think it comes down to stability. Even with all the, let's say, unpredictability of Trump, maybe investors feel like it's a known quantity.
The devil you know, right?
Exactly. They're probably expecting a continuation of the same economic policies, for better or worse, from his first term.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
Now, one wild card is Trump Media and Technology Group stock. It had a crazy day yesterday. Up, down, ended down 1%, then bounced back in after-hours trading.
That's a roller coaster.
It is. It
Yeah.
really shows the uncertainty and I think the speculation surrounding Trump's businesses.
Yeah, what's he going to do with them? How will it all intersect with his presidency this time around? I think that volatility speaks to those questions.
And to add to the intrigue, Bitcoin hit an all-time high on election night. Some people are connecting this surge to Trump's, his increasing odds in the betting markets as the night went on. It seems the crypto world might be feeling bullish about a second Trump term.
Yeah, and maybe they see him as a disruptor who could shake up the traditional financial systems. Or maybe it's just part of the trend of investors looking for alternative assets, a hedge against inflation. Who knows? But it's definitely interesting.
For sure. Now, not everything went smoothly on election day. There were some pretty serious disruptions caused by bomb threats.
Oh, right.
Yeah, aimed at polling places, especially in swing states.
Targeting those key areas.
Exactly. The FBI says these threats, they weren't credible, thankfully, but they've traced them back to Russian actors.
Which, raises those concerns about foreign interference again, trying to mess with our elections.
It's a reminder of how vulnerable our systems are, despite all the efforts to secure them. Pennsylvania was hit hard, about a dozen counties affected, and in Fulton County, Georgia, 32 polling places were targeted.
Wow. I mean, even if they're not credible, it's still disruptive. It creates fear, uncertainty. People might be less likely to vote if they're worried about their safety.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just physical threats. The FBI also put out warnings about fake videos spreading misinformation, like one urging people to vote remotely because of a made-up terror threat.
Trying to deceive voters, suppress turnout.
Exactly. It shows how sophisticated these disinformation campaigns are getting. They use social media, other online platforms to really spread these lies and manipulate people.
It's a real threat to democracy, isn't it? Undermining trust in the system, spreading chaos.
It is.
Yeah.
And we have to be aware of it, be critical thinkers, and really dully check information before we believe it or share it. Now, in the midst of all this, the Trump campaign was busy sending out emails on Election Day,
Oh, yeah. About what?
encouraging supporters to, buy merchandise from the Trump store, pickleball paddles for $180, Trump 45 sneakers, all kinds of stuff.
Well, the business never sleeps, does it?
It seems not, even on Election Day. But it does bring us back to that question of how Trump will handle his businesses during this second term.
Will it be like the first with all that entanglement between his business and his presidency? That's going to be something to watch for sure.
It is. It'll be interesting to see if he takes a different approach this time around or if it's business as usual.
Yeah, lots of eyes are going to be on that. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all unfolds. But, beyond the Trump business, the election also gave us a glimpse into where the country stands on abortion rights. And honestly, it's a mixed bag.
It is, yeah. Florida, for example, they went against the grain and rejected an amendment that would have legalized abortion.
Which is a pretty big deal, right? It's the first time an abortion ballot measure has failed since Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a major win for the anti-abortion movement, and it really goes against what we saw in other states.
Yeah, places like Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, New York, pro-abortion rights initiatives passed easily. So you've got this real split in the country, different regions with different values, different priorities when it comes to this issue.
It really highlights how divided we are on this, and it makes you think this debate is far from over.
Oh, absolutely. I think we're going to see more legal battles, more political fights over abortion access in the years to come, especially with the Supreme Court leaning more conservative.
Now, one topic that I was surprised didn't get more attention during the election was the federal minimum wage.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? All this talk about the economy, cost of living, and yet barely a whisper about the minimum wage.
Especially when you consider that 3 states actually had ballot initiatives to raise their minimum wages, shows that people care about this. But federally, it's still stuck at $7.25 an hour, hasn't budged in 15 years.
Which is, if you think about it, the longest stretch without a federal minimum wage hike since it was first put in place back in 1940.
Wow.
And even though only about 1.1% of U.S. workers actually make minimum wage or less, it's still an issue for millions of Americans trying to get by, with Prices going up and wages staying flat.
And the Democrats, they've been pushing for that $15 minimum wage for a while now. But Republicans have blocked it. So the question is, what happens now with a second Trump term?
Will we see any movement on this issue, or will it just fade into the background? I mean, think about it. What's Trump's focus likely to be when it comes to the economy? Will it be on creating jobs, policies that could boost wages organically, or is it going to be more about tax cuts, deregulation, the things that tend to benefit corporations and the wealthy more than those at the bottom?
Yeah, that's a big unknown, and it affects a lot of people.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about something we touched on earlier.
Right.
Election security and misinformation. Those bomb threats targeting polling places,
Yeah.
the fake videos, it's pretty concerning.
It is. I mean, thankfully, those threats weren't real. But it shows how fragile our democracy can be, how easily it can be disrupted, whether from outside forces or from within. It makes you wonder how secure are our systems, really.
Exactly. And, it's not just about preventing someone from literally interfering with voting. It's about the spread of misinformation, too. That fake video urging people to vote remotely because of some made-up terror threat that's designed to mess with people's minds to make them doubt the system.
Exactly. Deception, voter suppression, and these campaigns are getting more and more sophisticated, using social media, all these online platforms to amplify their message, to exploit the divisions that already exist.
So what do we do? How do we combat this?
Well, I think it takes a multi-pronged approach. You need to strengthen election security, obviously, but you also need to empower people to be more media literate, to think critically about what they see online. And there needs to be accountability for those who spread this disinformation.
I mean, it's about protecting the very foundation of our democracy, right?
Yeah.
Making sure elections are fair and that people have accurate information to make informed choices.
Exactly. It's a shared responsibility. We all have a role to play in safeguarding our democracy.
Now, in the midst of all the negativity, I think it's important to point out that there were some positives from this election. Voter turnout was up, particularly among young people.
Yeah, that's encouraging.
It is. It shows that people, especially the younger generation, are engaged, they care about the future, and they want their voices heard.
Right. They're not apathetic. They're stepping up and participating in the process. It's a sign that democracy, is still alive and well.
It gives you hope. Now, one topic that I was surprised didn't get much play during the campaign was climate change.
Yeah, you'd think with all the extreme weather events we've been seeing, the urgency of the issue, that it would be front and center.
Right. But it was barely mentioned by either candidate. It's like we're sleepwalking towards a disaster, pretending it's not happening.
And the question now is, with a second Trump term, who's going to champion this issue? Who's going to push for real action? I mean,
Well,
will it be up to grassroots organizations, the public, to put pressure on the government? Or will it just keep getting pushed aside while the problem gets worse and worse?
yeah, that's a scary thought. It really underscores the need for us to stay engaged, to keep pushing for change, regardless of who's in office.
Absolutely. We can't afford to be complacent. This is too important.
Wow.
We have to be the change we want to see. We have to demand more from our leaders, hold them accountable, support the organizations that are fighting for our planet.
Because it's not just an environmental issue. It affects everything. It's about social justice, the economy, our very survival.
Exactly. It's a moral imperative. We have to treat it with the seriousness and urgency it deserves. Okay, so moving on from that rather heavy topic, let's talk about something a bit lighter. In his victory speech, Trump made a big deal about infrastructure, investing in roads, bridges, airports. Sounds familiar, right?
It does, like a repeat of his first-term promises. But will it actually happen this time?
That's the question. I mean, infrastructure spending needs bipartisan support in Congress, which, given the current climate, could be tough. And then there's the national debt. That adds another wrinkle to any big spending plans.
Yeah, any major project is going to have to be carefully considered. And then there's the question of how to pay for it all. Tax increases, cuts to other programs, more borrowing.
It's a balancing act for sure, a lot of factors to weigh. But let's shift back to the digital world for a minute. This election, I mean, it really highlighted the impact of technology, especially social media.
Oh, absolutely. Social media has become the main battleground. It's where opinions are formed, information spreads, voters are mobilized.
Yeah, you see both the good and the bad, right?
Yeah.
It connects people, amplifies voices, can drive social change, but it can also be used to spread misinformation, to manipulate voters with targeted ads.
It's a powerful tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
Right. So, as we move forward, it's about figuring out how to harness the positive aspects of social media while minimizing the harm.
Promote media literacy, critical thinking. Hold these platforms accountable for the content they allow and the algorithms they use.
Because if we don't, it could have serious consequences for our democracy. But one of the most striking things about this election, I think, is just the sheer division it's exposed in the country.
Yeah, it feels like we're two separate nations, each with a totally different vision for the future. And that gap, it just seems to be getting wider.
It does. It's really striking, the level of polarization, the anger, the distrust. It's a bit disheartening.
It is. And it makes you wonder, how do we even begin to bridge this divide? How do we come together as a nation when it feels like we're so far apart?
That's the challenge, isn't it? It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of willingness to listen to each other, to understand where the other side is coming from, to find that common ground, even when it feels like there's none to be found.
It's easy to get caught up in all the negativity, the finger pointing. But, at the end of the day, I think most of us want the same things.
Right. We all want a country that's strong, that's safe, where everyone has a chance to succeed.
Exactly. We may disagree on the how, but the what, the goals,
Mm.
I think those are often pretty
And
similar.
I think that's where we need to start. Focusing on those shared values, those shared goals, and building from there.
And that brings us back to us. Our
Mm.
role as citizens. It's not enough to just vote every 4 years. We have to stay engaged, hold our leaders accountable, keep pushing for the changes we want to see.
Absolutely. It's about being active participants, not passive observers. Staying informed, thinking critically, being willing to have those tough conversations.
Yeah, stepping outside those echo chambers, those bubbles where everyone agrees with us. Because real progress, I think it comes from collaboration, from compromise, not from just shouting at each other.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, holding on to your own convictions, but also being open to other perspectives, realizing that we can all learn from each other. That diversity of thought, it's what makes a democracy strong.
And I think that's a good note to end on. As we move forward from this election, it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. It can be about hope, about action. We have the power to shape the future, but we have to actually do it. We have to work at it.
Couldn't agree more. It's a journey we're on together, and it's not going to be easy. There are going to be bumps in the road. But if we approach it with open minds, with a willingness to listen and learn from each other, I think we can create a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
Well said. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.